Greetings, everyone, and welcome to episode 10. So we have 10, which is a number of fulfillment and repetition, finishing from 9, completion. So today we have a very special guest who has accomplished many things and will accomplish many more things to come. We have Sherene Vismaya. Sherene, welcome.
Thanks, Josh.
So just a brief bio on Sherene. Sherene, Masters of Arts, is an astrologer, psychoanalyst, and mystic in private practice in New York City, San Francisco, and currently based in Kerala in India. For the past 20 years in consultancy with writings and teachings all across the world. She's been the resident astrologer for Elle UK since 2005. Wow, that's 15 years now. Creator of Constellation Magazine and author of several books. She's also a co-author, including Surviving Saturn's Return, Dog Stars, Fate of Your Date. And there are many books you can find on her Amazon website as well. She holds a master's degree from the New York University in clinical psychology, master's in developmental psychology from Pace University, and postgraduate work in psychoanalytic studies from the New School and ISAP Zurich. Sherene teaches classes and workshops internationally. She specializes in depression, shadow work, anxiety, creative blocks, and so on and so forth. She has pioneered her own unique approach in Jungian and somatic healing modalities, combined with a background in metaphysics, inspired by her yearly pilgrimages in India. Sherene, welcome onto the show. That was a mouthful of a bio.
Yeah, no, I'm tired. It's time to retire now. Now full residency in India. It's funny, it was my yearly pilgrimage turned out to be a yearly homecoming. Instead of it being a yearly pilgrimage, I just stayed.
You've been there since February, March?
January 1st.
Wow, it's already becoming it's already coming to a full year. And any plans to head back to the States anytime?
I hope not.
Okay, so Sherene, I've shared about your bio. Would you like to share with the viewers, some people who are familiar with your work, some people who are not, a little bit more about your history, a bit more about some information about your background with Jungian psychoanalysis?
Sure. So, I started off studying clinical psychology, like very dry, but, good, solid, rigorous foundation at New York University, but quickly realized that wasn't compatible with my more artistic nature. And even in high school, I was reading Jung, he was my jam in high school. It was all about Jungian studies. So even when I graduated, I asked my parents to get me the collected works for my graduation present.
Wow.
Which was quite a big, I didn't get that, but I had this, goal in life that I wanted to read the collected works. So maybe past life, I don't know. Something I really was very drawn to his work, especially because it bridged the gap between Eastern studies and Western mysticism. And I was already interested even in high school, I was already reading a lot of Tibetan books and Paramahansa Yogananda and really getting interested in Eastern spirituality and philosophy. So the clinical psychology in the West is very dry and very, statistic oriented. And I was bored to tears, but I stuck with it as long as I could. And then as soon as I got out, I said, I've got to go and really pursue my own interest in Jungian psychology. So, and I already had the background in tarot and astrology since I was a teenager, because my mother was into all of this metaphysics, luckily for me. And so, yeah, when I first started as a psychologist in New York City, I was afraid to combine. It was different than it is now. Back then, it was more controversial. If you were a psychologist, if you were going to bring in astrology, let's say, people would think, what's wrong with you, So I had to keep it undercover that I was also an astrologer, because I wouldn't have the same respect, especially when I went into private practice. I remember having the dilemma of do I tell my clients that I'm an astrologer too? Could I look at their charts? Is that ethical? And it was a very different world back then. I mean, it's changed so much. Now I think people are looking for psychologists who also have an interest in metaphysics, astrology, tarot. I think I'm sought out more for that now. And before I was trying to kind of, I mean, I make it sound more dramatic than it was just in the beginning. And then I thought the people found me that were interested in that work. And so it wasn't that long before I was out of the closet, you could say, with being more of a metaphysician. In fact, my first business card when I went into private practice back in Chinatown in New York City, I didn't know what to call myself. I was like, I don't really want to call myself a psychologist because I'm not doing that kind of diagnostic work, and I don't want to work in a hospital. So I called myself a metaphysician. And then I realized it sounded kind of pretentious, though. I went back to psychotherapist, and then now I'm just back to astrologer, Jungian analyst. So it's hard. It's still hard finding a title.
It's very hard because you have a very eclectic, diverse background. A lot of these modalities are interconnected. I was just on your site looking through some of the services and work you provide. Tarot, astrology, the clinical psychology element, so many aspects, and you're not just into one kind of astrology. I mean, you have knowledge and expertise in cross fields and different fields as well. So yeah, for those people who are just tuning in, I've known Sherene on Facebook for 5 years now. I've just checked; it's been since November 2015, so it's 5 years, the 5th year anniversary, and we've managed to finally schedule this just on the new moon. The solar eclipse in Sagittarius, and yeah, I think it's really interesting that you've mentioned about the so-called limitations you experience with clinical psychology in the West. So how would you for people who are very new to this, how would you share about Carl Jung's uniqueness he has added into this various fields which appeal to you?
Well, I think because he did have the background in the mysticism and alchemy. There's right on cue. 1 second, I have to feed speaking of alchemy, crow is a symbol for alchemy, and it's on my logo, this crow, right? And now it shows up literally, speaking of synchronicity, in my life every time I try to do a video. So people wouldn't know it's a video with me if I didn't have a visitation from my crow. So 1 sec. I will be right back.
Okay, no worries. So while she's going to feed the black crow, which is a symbol of alchemy, Sherene has been practicing astrology, tarot, and metaphysical practices for more than 2 to 3 decades. Right now, she's in Kerala, in India, on her pilgrimage, and we will speak more about this later in the show. So, how was that alchemical transmutation?
Yeah, so the crow is a Saturn symbol, and it's a remedy actually for Saturn. Did you know? So, if you're having difficult Saturn transit in your chart, to feed a black animal. It's not Saturday, but it's okay. Especially on Saturday, Saturn's day. But in general, feeding a black crow, well, they're all black, feeding a crow, I should say, or a black animal is a remedy for Shani, Lord Shani or Saturn. So I'm blessed in that I have several opportunities for this remedy each day. It's getting to be a little bit overkill now because every time I try to sit down and do some work or make a video, I get this visitation, this interruption where I have to go. Because if I don't go, he won't stop. He's very relentless. He wants to be part of the videos, I think. So Saturn's giving the blessing for our...
Yeah, it's part of the service. It's part of the service we provide back, right? So we were speaking about Carl Jung, about the uniqueness of his modalities. Would you like to share with us more?
Well, that was a perfect... Actually, that was a perfect illustration because what Jung really, I think, contributed that was so beautifully unique to psychology was the idea of, amongst many things besides alchemy, he brought alchemy in, and synchronicity, the idea of, if he was with a client, and this actually, there's a Indian branch of astrology where, I don't remember the name of it, but they actually do readings where the entire consultation, they just wait for an omen, that's the reading. The reading doesn't start until a crow shows up, let's say, or, some other obvious symbol, or something that allows the astrologer to zero in on that particular part of the horoscope. So in this case, we would look at Saturn because that's an obvious Saturn feature, but maybe, what if you were in an office and you saw a swan outside in the pond, then maybe you would look to Venus, or, things like that. So, or monkey, Mercury, you would just look for these different symbols and synchronicities. And Carl Jung did the same thing in his practice with his clients. In fact, whatever they were telling him, of course, that was important, but he was always looking for what was happening at the same time. Like, somebody could be telling him, let's say somebody was telling him one thing, and then the atmosphere around the session, maybe like a storm breaks out or something completely different than what the energy of what the person is conveying, the client is conveying in the session. He would look at that because he was always looking at the unconscious anyway, and the compensatory nature of the unconscious. So those omens, those symbols, those synchronicities that would show up in the session had just as much, if not more, significance to understanding what the unconscious was trying to communicate. So a lot of his work is more in alignment with Eastern thinking in many ways. I mean, he was also rooted in that rigorous Western training, of the mind. And, he was a doctor, he was a psychiatrist to begin with, but at heart, he was a mystic and an artist, and that's why we have the Red Book now, and why that, sadly during his time, they didn't feel it was safe enough to release that book. They had to wait until after his death, because I think it would have been too controversial. Even now, it's a little bit controversial, but I think we understand more that he could have been going through now without just saying, oh, he's psychotic, that was a psychotic break. We have a better understanding of, no, this is a person on a deep, deep soul journey, not afraid to go into the deepest levels of the unconscious where, yes, there's madness there, and the Western mind wants to just diagnose it and, give it a label and judge it. Right. And that's unfortunate. I think that's a limitation of Western thinking. It's very judgmental. I mean, it can be discerning when we need it to be, and it has its advantages, of course. I'm not trying to throw the whole thing out, but just, I think in terms of the life of the soul and the communication of the soul and the language of the soul, we have better tools, often coming from, let's say, like a Carl Jung approach versus the cognitive psychology approach, right? For instance. So in that way, he would be a great benefit to our spiritual journey. And also bridging, I think another big thing with Jung is bridging the spiritual path and the psychological journey, because often you have people that just want to go on the spiritual path and think they don't need the psychology. I'll just meditate. I'll just, I'm supposed to get over my ego anyway. I want to transcend this. And psychology is so limiting, it's so whatever people would say, that they think, now that I'm spiritual, I don't have to do all that. That's just dwelling in the past or diagnosing myself. And I feel Jung is the bridge, because when you're on the spiritual path, you have to confront your shadow. There's no, now we have this popular term, right? Spiritual bypassing. And now it's also quite trendy to talk about shadow work, right? That's like normal talk now. It's not so revolutionary, but that's from Jung. He was the one that really developed that concept of, no, you have to look at your shadow or it will keep following you. You can't transcend your shadow. Even people on the spiritual path, especially, they have that tendency if they haven't done the psychological work. And usually, like, for instance, I love Krishna Das. If you know him, he's quite famous for his chanting. He was a Neem Karoli Baba devotee, and he's become quite famous in the West for his chanting, right? But I like him, and I like his stories because he really tells it as it is, that you have to do the psychological piece of the journey. You can't skip that. Like, he went really far with his spiritual practice and then got thrown back into his own shadow and darkness. And he's very open about sharing his experience about how difficult that was, but how he had to come back to himself. He had to confront himself and clean out his own heart, as he always says. And That's what Jungian work is about, really. You go on that spiritual journey, but you don't escape the self. Like the self is the journey. The self is the path. And that includes the shadow, that includes your ancestry, that includes your biography. You don't just jump out of that. I mean, yes, we're trying to go beyond that. Ultimately, of course, we don't want to be identified with this body and mind and history and biography, but it's a process. You can't just say, okay, I'm not this body, It'd be great if we could just skip all those steps. But Saturn doesn't allow us to skip the steps. We have to really dive in and do that deep shadow work and understand our roots. The other thing Jung really contributed was explaining that it was dangerous for Westerners to skip the lower chakras. Like the Westerners want to be up here to start. We're here and we need to come down like an elevator, he said. And we all just want to be up here. So he said, really, Western psychology is to bring us down, back into the body, back into the grounding, back into lower chakras. That's why many people will have dreams even of like these elevators that just go up, and they don't. Have you heard of this, or maybe you've had dreamt this? It's quite a common dream symbol. You're on an elevator that's going crazy and it just goes through the ceiling, or it's lost its connection to the track. That's like the energy and the kundalini, the chakras. So Jung's like, we got to bring the elevator down, root it down.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You've mentioned so many interesting concepts right there. You've mentioned about the collective unconscious. You've also mentioned about the synchronicities, this recurring occurrences of phenomena. In also the archetypes, you've covered a bit on archetypes and shadow work. Shadow work is something maybe we can touch upon a bit later on as well, as with individuation. You've mentioned a bit about Saturn right there, and I have a quote. I have some quotes here from your book, which you co-authored, and I'd like to read it to the viewers here. This is from the works of Sherene, co-authored with Stephanie Iris Weiss. It's called Surviving Saturn's Return, Overcoming the Most Tumultuous Times of Your Life. So this is available on Amazon, or you can get it from her website. So there are two quotations here I'd like to mention and get some questions here. So Saturn is perhaps the guru of all gurus, which in Sanskrit translates as the great teacher who removes, which is Ru, the darkness, Gu. This is why Saturn is classically linked with depression, fear, and darkness. So later on it's mentioned, the Saturn returns is his signature initiation. If you can pass his hardest trial, you can probably ace the rest of his exams throughout your life. So this from your book, which you co-authored, it's very interesting. You've mentioned, it's fascinating, the guru. Jupiter is usually known as the guru, and Saturn is in Vedic astrology as Shani. But you've brought into light, you both brought into light the taskmaster here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to ask more about Saturn returns and your theory on Saturn being the guru of gurus here.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because that was before I studied any Vedic astrology. Now, I wrote that book. You have to realize I wrote that book. I was quite young and new to astrology. I remember, speaking of guru, I remember going to my guru Amma here. I was actually here in India at the time. We were trying to get that book published, and I was trying to ask Amma how much money we should ask for the, we were in the publishing deal. We were in that negotiation with the publisher to get it published. And Amma said, this is Saturn right here, guru, the guru side of Saturn, Jupiter, Saturn, whatever you want to say. Amma said, well, how long have you been studying astrology? And I was like, she doesn't think, because it's true, like in Western, mentality, we have this idea of like, we just want a lot of money. Like, it didn't even occur to me like, oh yeah, I'm sort of new. I mean, I'm just having my Saturn return. I've only been, at that point, I felt like I've been studying astrology forever, but it was only, hardcore, let's say 5 years, before I was dabbling, but I hadn't actually been studying astrology. So I hadn't been I felt it was a long time, but she was kind of putting me in check, my ego in check, like, hey, you know, you're still new. So that said, that book, I wrote it before I even knew about Vedic astrology or Jupiter being a guru. So to me, at that point, Saturn was the guru. And I guess any of the planets can be a guru too. You can remove darkness. Saturn, I think, in alchemy anyway, is associated with the nigredo, that level of darkness. Maybe Jupiter, now we would say, probably Jupiter is more likely to bring the teachings and the wisdom to remove. If Jupiter is the guru, Saturn, like you said, is maybe more of that cosmic taskmaster. Saturn is the, you know, he's the karmic lord, really, the more I understand him now, years later, right? That he brings karmic tests and limitations. And in alchemy, the nigredo is that part of the psyche that is the composite of all the darkness and fear and a little bit what you read. It's still true. It's just a matter of terminology, really. But the limitations, the fears, the guilt, the shame, the inner demons, all of that can be part of the nigredo. Nigredo just means like the black, hardened, calcified, you know, garbage that goes on in the mind. You know, it's like the muck, the gunk. Like if you were cleaning out in your sink, you know, in the drain, like whatever's been stuck in there, you know, from lifetimes, and you're like, you have to go in and clean it all out. That's like the nigredo. So in alchemy and in psychological healing, that beginning process, you know, why in spiritual path, it's the same. You know, often people start off and they're like, okay, I'm all into this. I'm going to meditate. I've got my guru, or I've got my therapist, or I've got my new 21-day meditation, or whatever it is, right? We're all ready to go. And then the stuff starts to come up. And then we think, oh, maybe this isn't working for me. Oh, I don't like this. What is all this? I thought I was on the spiritual path. I'm chanting, I'm meditating, I'm doing selfless service, or I'm going to my therapist 3 times a week, or whatever it is. I'm working out, I'm whatever people's path is, right? And then, and all the stuff, the more we do, the more stuff comes up. And alchemy is so helpful in understanding this, because I think without that model, it would seem kind of futile. Like, what's the point? I mean, well, of course, my guru, Amma, gives this beautiful, I love how she can break it down into such powerful yet simple terms. She said, you know, it is like if you're, you know, washing a dish and all this stuff comes first. You know, when you wash it, it's like all the stuff has to come to the surface first, too. That's part of the cleansing, right? But it's the same in alchemy. It's like when you start, it's like then you see all of that nigredo. You see all of that blackened, hardened, that's Saturn, you know, the stuff. And we see it in the horoscope as that part of us that's the hardest to change. It's like when we feel depressed, when we feel stuck, when we feel afraid, when we feel limited, when we feel like there's something wrong with us, or we just struggle, you know, we make slow incremental changes, but it tends to be that thing that is like where we feel a little bit lame or crippled or delayed or, you know, challenged. So alchemy, again, as a process shows, okay, you offer that up into the alembic. The alembic could be your spiritual practice. It could be your therapeutic relationship. It could be your own romantic relationship, whatever's holding the space for you to go into that darkness and transmute it and change. And it's a long process, you know? And so that kind of leads into, because I know you wanted to talk about the Project 40 work, and this would be a good segue into that if you want to talk about it, because that, and we've been talking, that's Chico again to my crow, because in Project 40, it was inspired by combining alchemy, my interest in alchemy through Carl Jung's work, with a process we could do like an alembic, something that could hold the space other than just one-on-one therapy. I thought, what if we use this concept of 40 days, because alchemy is considered like a 40-day process. And I was fascinated with the whole concept of 40, the magic of the number 40. I started looking up all the symbolism of 40, and it's very powerful. You know, all the things that happen in 40 days, you know, it's a very mystical number. And I thought, I did it as an experiment first, you know, when Uranus was still in Aquarius in tropical astrology back in 2010. So I thought, all right, let's try this out. You know, let's just see what happens. If we set an intention and we put it on the altar, I call it the altar. We offer this up to the gods for 40 days and 40 nights. And, we can't necessarily go out in the desert like Jesus or Buddha, but we just figuratively go into the desert. We just kind of go into this space that is more of a sacred space. Even if we're still in our lives, we carve out some sacred space every day to reflect and journal and check in with this process. So modern version of going into the desert for 40 days. So I said, let's try it. We'll put the insoluble, what I call the insoluble problem, like the thing that the Saturn, the Negreda, what is that thing that you feel stuck all the time with? Or what is the thing right now that you feel like you're struggling with? You offer that up, and then you see what happens over 40 days and 40 nights. So you go through your own, it's like a condensed, you get the alchemy, you get the journey. And I did 40 of them. And then just last year, I started over because I thought I would retire from that project 40 once I did 40. But then it happened so fast, and I thought, well, I'm not done. The work is never finished. And I couldn't imagine what else I would do. I was convinced I would move on because I usually move on to something else. I don't know. Maybe I don't. I don't think I move on. I would just, in theory, think I move on. I don't really move on to things. I'm fixed. I'm all fixed signs. So I couldn't give it up. And then I said, okay, let's do part 2, 2.0.
Maybe it's 400, not 40.
Yeah, it's project 200. So yeah. I'm on part 2.0, and this is my, this year I did already, of the new ones, I think this is, I stopped keeping track. The first ones I actually counted them. I should count these. I think this is the 4th one now of the new series.
So for those of you joining in, we have Sherene Vismaya, astrologer, tarot reader, metaphysician, so many things. We are speaking now about P40, which is Project 40. It's a 40-day and 40-night journey, a unique alchemical healing journey. And so you are collaborating with a few other people on this project as well, right? Kathleen?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes I do them solo, and then depending on the theme, if it's a theme where I can bring in an expert or somebody who specializes to co-create it with me, I love collaboration. So a lot of them I do with other people, but sometimes I do them solo.
Nice. Would you like to share with us a bit about the upcoming conjunction? So we have, in a couple of days, we have, Saturn, Jupiter, and entering Aquarius, and then on the winter solstice we have this grand event. Very interesting how, looking at a lot of planets a couple of days ago being in Scorpio, and now you have Jupiter and Saturn entering Aquarius. Would you like to, I'm sure this, for many astrologers and tarot readers, this is something very, very interesting to look into.
Definitely. And again, we're talking from the Western astrological tradition, the tropical zodiac now. So Jupiter, well, there's a few ways we could break this down. I mean, there's a lot to talk about here, but I think to keep it simple. So one of the big things with this grand conjunction, the great mutation they're calling it, is because it's actually, even though Jupiter and Saturn join every 20 years, it's been 200 years since we switch elements. So now we're going into air. We've been in Earth and we're moving into air. That's significant. So the way I look at it, though, in terms of archetypes, is through the lens of the tarot imagery. So Jupiter in the tarot is the Wheel of Fortune, and Saturn is the world. So I like to think of it visually as those two coming together. So the Wheel of Fortune is all about the turning of fate, the turning of the wheel. And Saturn is also about fate and the turning of the cycles, like a time in the longer sense. Jupiter is more like the 12-year cycle, right? Saturn's a 30-year cycle. So you have the idea of these shorter cycles of Jupiter, which is more about expansion and abundance and life as the teacher that brings you through abundance and gifts and good fortune. Usually, I mean, sometimes Jupiter, of course, can amplify things that are difficult. But for the most part, Jupiter is more protective and benevolent, right? And then Saturn you know, the longer cycle, the long haul, the karmic retribution cycles, you know, facing your karmic debt, really. So it's interesting to think about when the two come together, because we can feel that cycles are ending, you know, and there's like two levels of an ending. I think there's this ending of a Jupiter experience we've had of a lot of expansion, a lot of freedom, a lot of air travel. You know, we were flying all over the world, right? And kind of a sense of being, a lot of people feeling kind of like there was no limit, like invincible, like we could just zoom around. Well, now we are actually zooming around. I keep saying that word unconsciously. I think it's where we are on Zoom now. But before that, we were actually in the airplanes and we were traveling all over the world, and we could, you know, there was a sense of the sky's the limit, Jupiter kind of influence. And then Saturn crashed down on us last year. So it feels to me like they're kind of coming together to have a conversation or a negotiation about what's going to happen in 2021, because it's like Jupiter was really like, okay, Saturn kind of took over 2020, I think. I mean, Saturn was like, look, you're all staying home. You're all under house arrest. You just think about what you've done. You do some reflection. You pay off some of your debt to nature. Give her a break. You know, we're going to put the limits and the grounding on you because you guys need to just stop. And then, of course, we're all ready to, like, I think many people, like, the minute they feel like the coast is clear, they want to just jump back out and know what's going to happen. So it feels to me like before we go into this new year, isn't it interesting? These two planets are coming together to have a conversation and negotiate. When they come so close, I mean, in Vedic astrology, they call it a planetary war. And then I've heard different perspectives of which different Vedic astrologers think Jupiter's winning and some think Saturn's winning. I've heard good arguments for both. I'm not as advanced in Vedic to call it. I don't know enough of all of the indications of who would win and why, declination, all this stuff. I hear different theories. I think it's interesting. But in Western, you know, we look at it in Western astrology, we don't really look at it as a war as much as like an alchemy, a coming together of like what happens when these two come so close together. There's a way that they're merging, and in the sky they're forming this beautiful Christmas star. There is something that feels very hopeful about it, at least in the Western imagery, because you have the star archetype of Aquarius. It's very hopeful, like after a dark time the stars come out and you feel like you can wish upon a star again. And there is that dawning feeling of like the light returning. You know, the solstice is the darkest night of the year in the northern hemisphere, and then the days finally start to get slowly but surely longer again, and it's like the return of the light. So there's something to that. I mean, I'm not all like, oh, it's going to just be easy breezy clear sailing from this point on. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done. Saturn is still there governing, you know, is still overseeing. And the other thing with Aquarius is Saturn is still the traditional ruler of Aquarius. So even in Western astrology, because yes, Uranus now is a dispositor, and we do have that influence, which is nice, which it's, you know, this is an interesting thing to talk about, and especially since we share this kind of East meets West situation that I've been thinking about a lot. Like in the Western, it's almost like, I mean, actually we have the same situation in psychology. So it's like, depending on which viewpoint you subscribe to, it will influence your version of reality. Like if you're here in India and you're thinking, oh my God, this is a planetary war and Saturn's winning, and it's like, you know, destruction is coming, and it's probably going to influence the situation. And if you're in the West and you're like, this is a frequency upgrade, you know, when I go to the Western, I hear people like, we're having the ascension and the frequency upgrade, and the star is coming, you know, the starlight is coming. And that feels true to me too. Both, I feel both are true. It just depends on which lens we're looking through. So I think it's not an either or thing, but it's just, like Jung says, examining the crystal from different angles, different facets. And these are all different tools we have. So there's definitely a conversation going on between the planet, the guru planet, and the Lord of Karma, we could say, right? So what happens when the guru and the Lord of Karma get together? either they're fighting or they're having a conversation. I mean, my Vedic astrology mentor Puneet actually says that it's like, I think he said it as Jupiter is coming to learn from Saturn. I mean, it was interesting. I have to look. You have to listen to that again, because he and I actually just had a discussion about it for my Aquarius rising. I have this big symposium coming up this weekend, actually. So this timing is great. And we did a talk about his predictions for 2021. And I think he said it was like pretty sure he said Saturn was going to be teaching Jupiter. You know, Jupiter would get some new training or new knowledge from Saturn. I hope I don't have that reversed. I'm pretty sure it was that way. That Saturn would be teaching. I'm sure they're both teaching each other things. In my view, they're both, through this conversation, they're both teaching and learning things. But it was interesting what he said. I'll let you know. I'll have to review it, because of course I was, as an interviewer, when I was taking it in, I was also trying to keep up with what I was going to be asking next. So I have to rewatch it now. But
Wonderful.
yes, the conversation. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. So you've mentioned about the Saturn ruled Capricorn, from the devil card going into Saturn ruled Aquarius, which is the star, also co-ruled by Uranus. And astrology also, east or west, I mean, we have a lot, sometimes various different views, but it can also be seen as like interactions, interconnections of these energies, and how we are also not only instinctually being pushed, unconsciously, but also with karma, from a Buddhist perspective, is volitional action, so it's like using your will volitionally, intentionally, with the motivation. So if you are able to consciously act upon and transform certain behaviors, certain patterns which are undesirable, from the lab into the spiritual goals of alchemy of the West, I think that would be a really interesting phase. I do not know if we have much time, maybe at some other point, I think we'll take another hour, because I wanted to ask you at some point about 2021 predictions, but I think that could be for another time. We have something interesting before we end off. I'd like to also know a bit more about your mystical practice, and then maybe towards the end, the last few minutes, you could share some tips, advice, suggestions, just in general, from the wealth of experience you've had in spirituality, whether for now or for next year. So maybe we can have the tips and advice at the end. So
Sure.
your guru is Mata Amritanandamayi, the hugging saint, also known as Amma. And I actually met her in Singapore in early 2018. I went for darshan.
Oh,
Yes.
yes.
So would you like to share with us about your relationship with Amma, the hugging saint, and
Mata Amritanandamayi Devi. Yes. Wow, what to say? I mean, that could be like 10 podcasts at least. So just feel like owe everything to Amma. She came into my life in 1998 and or 7. I can never remember. 1997 and 98, somewhere around there. And actually 97. And wow, I mean, just completely, she was the alchemy for me. I mean, she was the gold. Just meeting her, everything changed, and she was what I'd always been looking for. I always felt this. I mean, it's interesting being where I am now with her, spending a year with her, which is such a blessing that I don't even have words for. Very humbling experience. And being with her for this year has shown me that she's what I've been searching for my whole life. And she's been with me my whole life. Only I didn't know it until it's like you coming home to yourself, and always felt something was missing in my life. Always felt something was missing. Always had this kind of ache, and this longing. And I would come here for a few months at a time and be so blissed and blissed out and happy and sometimes miserable. It is a spiritual path after all, but mostly like always very, very happy to be here, you know? And, but then I would leave and I have to go back to the States or wherever I was traveling to for my work and everything. So I didn't realize how much, you know, I needed to just be with my guru. I mean, at least now, I don't know, life changes too. And I know that it's about finding the guru on the inside. My Amma was very clear about that, you know, but sometimes you have to form this deep attachment and longing and devotion for the physical guru to you can, through that love and through that longing and attachment, you can take all the lesser attachments, you know, and offer them up at the lotus feet of your guru, so that eventually just becomes about the longing for the guru, and the guru is nothing other than your own self. But it's too abstract for us, you know, to just say, okay, I'm just devoted to the self, you know. It's very lonely when it's that, you know, because we're relational. So what a beautiful thing that we have, especially like in this day and age, you know, when they always say the masters reincarnate, they incarnate when Dharma needs to be restored. So here we have an incarnation of the divine mother, divine goddess Kali. How beautiful, because we need in the hugging saint. So she's saying, showing what the world needs is affection, hugging, you know, that's what's missing to set the world back into harmony, love. We need hugs and affection and kisses. And that's, I'm so grateful to have a guru that's like the hugging saint, you know. She's not some remote being in a cave, inaccessible, you know, she's out there. That's what she's modeling. What the world needs is this divine feminine energy. And we might think of, oh, the goddess Kali as like this fierce, destructive energy. And she does destroy the ego, but so adorable and so loving, you know. She showed me how just adorable the divine is. You know, that's been such a sweet gift and experience of this time with her. So yeah, what to say? I mean, it's just a constant purification. I really owe everything to her. I really think my Project 40s are because of her. It really came together all the time I've spent here. Anything I've created in my life, really, that has value and lasting value to me, or feels like really of my heart, it has come from and through time I've spent here, or time I've spent with Amma. And so it's a real gift to be able to work from here, because it's just so much closer to the source. So each day, I don't take it for granted, you know, each day I'm here, it's the biggest gift of my life. So I don't even have words. I'm just very grateful to be here.
That was just 8 minutes of pure devotion and gratitude, and, you know, just being so thankful for where you are in your life right now, where all the challenges and the successes, and just at this point, just humbling at the feet of the lotus feet of your teacher. I think that's really beautiful.
I talk about that all day. I would be in bliss. That's my favorite thing. Yeah, talk about that anytime you want.
Yeah, and I think it's so important. I think I would like to share this point really quickly before we close with Sherene's advice for all of us spiritually. I'd like to add that, you know, for people who are aspiring astrologers, whether you are a beginner, whether you are in a professional stage, or whether you are into tarot, whether you're into alchemy, east or west, any kind of practice, it's very important to have a path of spiritual cultivation. You know, we have to realize that, yes, intellectual knowledge to some level, to the logical mind, could be important for reasoning, for critical thinking and whatnot. However, in order to move into the formlessness or into the emptiness, the spaciousness of mind, it's non-logical, and it's elements of guru devotion, as we see here from Sherene to Amma, intense retreat, just like the hermit archetype, and introspection, contemplation, self-study, and meditation, you know, and all this spiritual techniques into penetrating the ultimate nature of reality. So I think it's really important at some point. I would really encourage people to really move beyond our comfort zone, if we can travel, not only physically, but with our hearts and minds, and learn about a wealth of different cultures, but at the same time finding what we really need to cultivate on the path. So Sherene, thank you so much for your kindness, your graciousness. Before we leave, some tips, advice on the go for people for 2020, 2021. It's been it's been a really challenging year for, I think, for many, many people.
Yeah. I think the most important thing going into 2021 is to not take anything for granted. I think if nothing else, we've seen how precious those moments are that we don't know when they're going to be taken from us. All the things, maybe the things we've lost can be our teachers for appreciating what we still have. You know, it's a little bit like the Five of Cups tarot card, you know, with the man, he's mourning the cups that are spilled. There's 3 cups that have spilled, and there's 2 behind him that are still standing. And I think we're all kind of, and it's part of the process. We have to grieve what's lost, but we don't want to turn our back on what is still there. And we want to, in fact, I think in 2021, bring all of our attention to what is remaining and what is right in front of us, that we could pour all of our 120% of our love and devotion into that moment. Instead of focusing on what's lost, moving forward, I think we have to focus on what's in front of us that we can love and nurture and cultivate and be completely present with, because that is the gift. I mean, you know, all the spiritual teachers are always telling us we only have the present moment. That's really all we have. Everything else is an illusion anyway. The past is an illusion. The future is an illusion. So, of course, we're human beings. We mourn the past, we don't spiritually bypass and say, oh, well, you know, the past, forget it. We have to move through those feelings. That's the only way through is through. You know, you can't skip it. But knowing that the healing is only going to happen in the present. And in the present, usually things are better than any sadness we might have over the past, or nostalgia or longing for the past, and any anxiety or future planning we may have for the future that takes us out, that robs us of all the sweetness that could be right in front of us. So hopefully this was a gift. And also that we have so many inner resources, because we've lost a lot of our distractions, outer world distractions. I mean, maybe we still have some tech distractions, or last remaining distractions, whatever's in our house, but considering what we had, we've slowed down a lot. And so hopefully coming home to ourselves more, we realize we need a lot less. You know, we can be happy with a lot less, and we can take care of ourselves. We don't need to always be running around and having all of this external feedback all the time, even though it's fun and maybe we'll have it again on some level, and we need people. I'm not saying we should all be isolated islands, but in fact, that is going to be a big Aquarian theme going forward, that we need each other. But this was our kind of time out, I think, 2020, to really introspect and deepen our relationship with ourselves, so that when we do come back together, hopefully we'll come back together with a stronger sense of self. Because it was a big Aries year last year. It was 6 months of Mars in Aries, really like come into ourselves, right? The I am principle of the self. And it was the Emperor archetype 4 year. So it was really a year of coming into the self. And 2021 is a 5-year, which is about faith. And there'll be some testing still, but it's testing of our faith, I think, in 2021. And last thing I'll say is it's like going back into the tarot, because I know we share that love of the tarot, Josh. So the World card, which is Saturn, and Judgment. So 20 is the Pluto Judgment card, and 21 is the World. And they're the dominant archetypes for the numerology. Last year we had double 20, so double Judgment. We also had double Fool, double Priestess, if you want to do that, and Emperor. This year we could say we have the Priestess again, we have the Fool, we have the Magician, we have another Priestess, we have 2 Priestesses again, we have a Magician, and we have the Fool, and we have the World and the Judgment. So if you put all of those together, I would say it's a year of, again, major ending, because it's the last 2 cards of the tarot. So it's the end of this long journey that we've been on. So the ending of that. And then at the same time, there's like getting ready for the new beginning. We need to really cultivate our magic. We need the goddess, the double priestess. Again, we need that connection to our divine feminine, our intuition, our dream work, our shadow work. All that's still very important, I think, going forward. And of course, all this Aquarius energy, I think we need astrology. We're going to all be wanting to study the stars. Aquarius is the study of the stars. So
beautiful. You've mentioned how, Mars in Aries, very emperor archetype for 2020. It's also like 2 + 0 + 2 + 0, which is 4, the emperor. And going into 2021, it's 5, which is 2 + 0 + 2 + 1, which is the Hierophant. So very interesting, Taurian, kind of stability in terms of also our comfort at home, but at the same time, the Aquarian community, hope, optimism.
Yeah. But needing to really ground in our own values. New values are coming. We're going to change our values, I think, in 2021. Hopefully, we'll get more grounded, more simple. Hopefully, return to nature. I think more people returning to nature in 2021.
Thank you for your graciousness, kindness, and for sharing your wealth of knowledge and wisdom. We've been, it so happened that it was just, it just happened at the point of this eclipse that it was meant to be. All right, we've been trying for a few months.
Divine timing. It waits till the perfect time.
Yeah, so it's been really kairos, within the chronos. It's really the divine timing within chronos itself. So it's really interesting, and I will include links here to join the YouTube channel. I will include links of Sherene's websites, Instagram, Saturn Sisters page as well, and you can look into her works. If you need consultation, advice, there are a lot of services provided on the website, and I sure hope that you'll get the chance to interact with her, like her post, and read a lot of the interesting insights coming. So Sherene Vismaya, thank you once again for your graciousness. Very beautiful to finally meet you after 5 years, even though it's true here. I'll see you in Kerala at some point.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. All the best. Thank you. And talk to you later.
Okay.